I think I'm pretty secure in my spirituality.
Because I feel good most of the time.
Yes.
And that's my evidence.
I'm gonna just get to the point. Negative thought. It's really, really hard to deal with sometimes because, things happen.
Well, when it's hard, don't try, because you just make it worse. Just think in terms of momentum. And when you focus on something, you're adding momentum to it. And the more momentum you add, then the bigger it gets and the more difficult it is. If you just keep remembering that you being in the receptive mode is the goal, because all the other work's done. Step 1 is done, step 2 is done, step 3 is to get into the receptive mode. So once you accept that receptive mode is the goal and you're in the middle of a negative thought, well, it's unlikely, if the momentum is strong, like you are describing here, it's unlikely that you're going to get to the receptive mode easily. So why not let it go until it just sort of subsides, and then you can pick it up when it's easier?
Well, I'll give you an example. I was driving to see my brother. Like I said, been doing a lot of spiritual work.
So before you go further, we'd like to understand a little bit about the momentum with your brother. How do you get along with your brother?
Oh, great.
Yeah, so getting ready to be ready, going to see your brother.
Right.
Good momentum there.
Good momentum. But I was just consciously wanting to be aware of, I call it the little guy on my shoulder, putting negative thoughts or showing me past negatives. That
little guy got really manifested, didn't he? You turned that little thought form into something even bigger, didn't you? Has he got a pitchfork? We're playing with you a little bit. Don't make him real. All that little guy is just momentum from thoughts that are not pleasing you. In other words, we wouldn't give him the time of day like that. So what you might want to say now, because you're all tuned in, tapped in, turned on, is I wanted to be aware of my thoughts that day. I wanted to have positive momentum going into the rendezvous with my brother. And feel the difference. Doesn't that promote a different momentum than I want to keep this little guy, this whispering things that aren't helpful to me, out of the way? Did he light up for all of you?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's out of my,
it's out of your control.
It seems out of my control.
Well, it really kind of is in that moment, because you're at the bottom of the hill. The momentum's too great. Just get out of the way, because there's not anything that you're going to really do to fix it right then, that red hot minute. But what we want to hear from you maybe is what was going on before that thought was so big that it was out of your control. In other words, it didn't just all of a sudden, you weren't just bipping along, living happily ever after, and all of a sudden, boom, there he is. That's the way they show it in the movies, but that's not the way it is. That's not the way law of attraction produces it in your picture.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess over, I'll just sum it up. In the last probably few years, I've experienced some traumatic things that happened in my life. And I feel like because I was on that spiritual journey, I was able to deal with it a lot better than probably say most. But I still had to deal with it.
Do you think being on your way to see your brother was part of what activated that a little bit? Does he have memory of what you've been through?
Oh, yeah.
And so was it likely that there might be a conversation about some of that? Because you see, this ready to be ready to be ready to be ready to be ready. You kind of follow that thought? So ready to be ready is ready for the receptive mode, whatever the receptive mode is. So maybe being on your way to see your brother got you sort of ready to be ready for what you might talk about with him, got you feeling a little bit about what you'd come through, made you feel a little defensive or justifying. Something started that trend of thought. And all we're saying is, at the time that it first began, that's when you want to deal with it. And if you didn't deal with it, and that's all right, don't worry, it'll get bigger, but it'll get bigger to the point that you can't deal with it in that moment. So what happens when it gets bigger and you can't deal with it in this moment? The contrast throws more into the vortex. So now the vortex is calling you in a stronger way. You're less likely in that moment to be able to go, but later, like after meditation or when you first wake up in the morning or something, there'll be another opportunity and another and another and another. There's a little theme going on, and it's a human theme that goes something like, I'm doing really good, and I'd like to explain to you how much I've overcome. And that explaining what you've overcome takes you right back in it so that you're not overcoming it, you're reliving it again a little bit. And that comes from feeling a need to explain to somebody else why you're where you are, which usually happens when you're on your way to see your brother or anybody that knows you, because most of you, we love you so much, but we have to give this to you. Most of you see yourself through the eyes of others, and therefore you feel a need to contour their view of you. So you've got your nose in somebody else's business. You've got your nose in the business of what they think of you, and that's not your business. What they think of you is not your business, because you can't control what they think of you. You don't know how hard they're trying to stay in the receiving mode. They're just remembering all the bad stuff that went down earlier. It's like looking through a photo album of your life to visit your brother or anybody. So you've got to come into a place of really not needing to influence their opinion of you, because that just activates something that no longer even is. And you know what the most wonderful thing is? All that stuff that you kind of want to talk about and that we really don't want to talk about for this reason, all that stuff you've lived has culminated in what you are. And wow, what you are and what's in your vortex, there's so much there. And that walk down memory lane is far less satisfying and has far more potential of activating stuff that just slows you down and slows you down and slows you down. You've been listening to us for a while. So when you hear us say, when you know what you don't want, you know what you do want, and that rocket of desire goes into your vortex. Now that was a very quiet and disproportionate in terms to the importance of it delivery there. What we mean to say is all of the important and delicious components of your life, every one of them has unleashed a stream of becoming that your inner being revels in every day. Oh, look what his life has produced for him and all of us. And then that stream of thought that you keep amending with each argument or each misunderstanding or each whatever you're doing as you're going through the contrast of life, each stream of that just makes this bigger, richer, more beautiful palette of creation that's in the process of becoming. And your inner being revels in every bit of it and only feels love and praise and appreciation for everything you lived that created that. And now your inner being wants to say to you, it's time for this to be what you focus on. That served you and went over here. Focus here now, not over there. So, now there are a couple of reasons that we think that's a good idea. Here's the biggest one. That's the only place your inner being's looking, and when you look where your inner being doesn't look, you don't feel good. That could be reason enough. Your inner being isn't looking back because your inner being has no reason to justify the magnificence that you are by the contrast that you lived. Because your inner being does not wish to insert more contrast into your now about stuff you already know. Isn't that nice?
But just one last thing. And like one of the situations was, you know, my mother was transitioning. And this was probably during a time when I really was invested in you and looking at the videos to try to stay, you know, in a positive sense. But, well, not but, it really, it was hard. It was really, really hard. Some good things came out of
misunderstanding is always hard. Believing that your mother is gone is gut-wrenching because it isn't true. Your inner being knows different. When you look at it that way, you put a pretty big vibrational gap between you and your inner being. When you think of her as the last one who really loved you and really understood you, your inner being didn't think that because your inner being knows that isn't true. But when you think that, it hurts. But it's not hurting because your mother went away. It's hurting because you're not in connection with your inner being and blaming it on your mother going away.
Okay.
Nice to know, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. A belief is just a thought you keep thinking. So anytime you focus upon something that is really contrary to what your inner being knows, it feels off. When you think, I'm not smart, that feels off. When you think, I'm not good, that feels off. When you think you're not smart, that feels off. When you think you're not good, that feels off. You just can't get contrary of the source within you without feeling what it feels like to pinch that off just a little bit. And so little by little, if you care about the way you feel, you find more ways to focus upon what you really know. And meanwhile, every time you take a jog into the weeds where you're focusing on something that your inner being knows isn't true, you just launch the rocket of desire to understand it. In other words, there can be no answers if there are not questions, and there can be no solutions if there are not problems. It's all part of the expansion and evolution. But doesn't it get to a really good place once you know these things? Once you know your source energy and you are good. Once you know that you came into this experience purposefully with powerful intent. Once you know that you intended to mix it up and you intended to experience contrast because you intended to come to your own conclusions about what would be good for you. Once you know that your inner being has been watching you every step of the way and has been holding and containing all of the new conclusions that you've come with, not just in this lifetime, through all of them, and that your enormous, magnificent expansion is known by your inner being, and that a signal is being broadcast to you all day, every day, about who you are. And all you got to do is get into a position where you can hear that, where you can receive that. That's all. The thing that keeps you from knowing that sooner is that you hold beliefs that go something like, well, when that source talks to me, it will be really about spiritual stuff. It'll be about harps and angels and God stuff. And we say what it's about is about what's in your vortex. It's about your expansion. It's about your becoming. It's about you coming into alignment with all that you believe is good. And sometimes it's about things that are of interest to you. When you receive it, don't question it, don't judge it, don't evaluate it, just let it flow. But show yourself, let yourself be in a position that you can tell the difference between the thoughts you're thinking and the thoughts you're receiving. Because if it's a thought that you're receiving and you know that, and how are you going to know this? How are you going to know this in the way that we know this? Because our volume doesn't help you know it, even though we think that the volume might help. Our volume doesn't help you know it. Our intensity doesn't help you know it, because words don't teach. It's only life experience that teaches. So when you meditate and when you quiet your mind and when you get in that detached place and when you know that your mind is quiet, and then when a thought comes to you, you can know that it was from the receiving mode. And when you follow it, you'll meet your musician on the beach. Or when you follow it, you'll be ready for this and ready for this and ready for this. And this is how life unfolds for you. This is how your life is supposed to be. One lovely receiving after another, because there's enough in your vortex. You put it all there to keep you busy for 20 or 30 lifetimes. It's time for you to get into the receiving mode and start allowing what your inner being knows about what you want, and what your inner being knows about your perspective or your relationship or your whereabouts. Your inner being knows where you stand in relationship to everything that you want, and is offering constant guidance and clues and impulses, most of which most of you are missing because you're not in the receiving mode. And why are you not in the receiving mode? Because you're in the thinking mode, you're in the texting mode, you're in the talking mode, you're in the communicating mode, you're in the defending mode, you're in the justifying mode, you're in the explaining how it goes mode, you're in the trying to convince somebody mode, you're in the trying to get them to see you the way you want them to see you mode. You just got to chill. You just got to accept that step one has already happened. Boom, it's there. Step two has already happened. All has been gathered around. Step three is, nice and easy, nice and easy. Really good conversation and good time for a segment of advice.